Is with us too, and we're going to have a diversity of opinions this morning. I can see that already, which is good. Okay. Anyway, um, I think we're still working through some of Dane's questions. Morning, Dane.
Morning.
And first question is, at what point is your curriculum complete? Do you include every single technique that you ever learned? And if not, how do you decide what to put in and what to omit? This kind of question at 8 o'clock in the morning is a bit much. But anyway.
You're welcome.
Any thoughts or we're all being hesitant this morning? Okay, I'll start. No, you can't include, if you're going to be teaching, unless you're in a system where everything is already set up and rigid, and to violate it takes an act of God. Many sensei end up having to set up their own system, or they decide to do so. Okay, which is another issue. And so when I guess at what point is, you're teaching, at what point do you think you're teaching enough, or are you teaching everything? Go ahead.
I'll jump in here a sec. I took the system that you set up and put the belt levels on large paper, laminated it, and set it up on a pool table in the dojo so that people could go over and see yellow belt techniques and look them up themselves. Attack, block, strike, throw, submission, Japanese name, English name, and each of the belt levels, right across, so they can go over and decide what they want to work on, how they want to work on it, and they can work in groups of 3, Ukitori observer, and that's when they're working by themselves. When we're working together, we're still following the system that you set up. And what happens is we might bring in some Russian sistema to compare and contrast, or Krav Maga. And I just quickly remind them that no matter what we call it, it's all jujitsu.
Okay. I face the, I guess, sort of frustration that Seki taught the same things in so many different ways that, I've got this tome, so to speak, of over 800 techniques and variations. I'd love to be able to teach them all. Some of them I look at and I say, how do you do that? Because I question my own notes. And I really didn't organize things until I wanted to teach the program for the school district I was in, and they said you have to have goals and objectives and all this other stuff. And so I tried to come up with it. Bless you, Darren. I tried to come up with a logical or somewhat logical sequence of techniques to be taught that I thought were on the basic side. And I think by the time a person gets to black belt, I don't know how many techniques they actually know, but I think it's maybe only a fraction of what's in the densho. And my hope is always that, advanced students will go to that densho and look up some of the other variations and try them. But I couldn't put that all into a quote unquote curriculum because no one would live that long. This is play on words. It's just it's a lot of material, and so if I were to say is my curriculum complete, I'd have to honestly say no. If there's other knowledge that you have that you would ideally like to teach to your students, but it's not in your quote unquote curriculum, then no, your curriculum is not complete, at least not to your own personal satisfaction. But does the curriculum work? I mean, does it bring the students up to a certain skill level? That's maybe the more important question.
So you're kind of saying like, the curriculum, so to speak, is separate from the goal of the curriculum, say, and you're trying to get somebody to a level of proficiency. Like Dave said, everything is just jujitsu. So you're just trying to get to a level of proficiency in jujitsu, and it doesn't matter what flavor of Kotegaeshi as long as you know one, that's good enough. And then they can go on and learn the variations and all that kind of stuff. But you don't need to put 30 Kotegaeshis in your curriculum. They just need to get one of them, right? And then so there's kind of like a curriculum for teaching, and then sort of a collection of everything and they don't have to be the same, right?
Okay.
Is that what you're saying? Kind of like, a million things, but you just need to teach one of them to move that person forward, and then let them worry about the other million of them.
Right. I understand what you're saying completely. My only question is, and this is a philosophical question, by not teaching different ways of doing the same technique, there are two questions here. One, if you're not teaching more than one or two variations of a technique, are you denying the student the opportunity to find a way of doing that technique that's better, easier, better for them? And now I forgot the second part of the question, which is because if Seki showed, for example, basic Koshinagi, he would probably show it two or three different ways when he was showing it. And you wouldn't see two of those ways for another year or so. And unless you were really paying attention, you missed the subtleties, and maybe the subtleties would help a student learn a particular technique better or easier. So, for me, that's the quagmire. And I have to restrain myself if I'm teaching a basic technique. Sometimes, a handful say, well, we teach it and you pivot your left leg back, the uke falls to your left side, and, that's pretty standard. But how many sensei also teach, well, you can step forward, you can step out at 45 degrees, you can go under his arm, end up with a wrist lock takedown. I mean, there are all sorts of different things you can do with the basic core Tenagi or Kotegaeshi movement. And at what point, as an instructor, what's your responsibility? At what point do you stop? Because if you show too much, it totally blows a student's mind, because they're still trying to get the basic concept, and you're off in Wonderland.
I'd say I'll jump in. I think I heard a couple of different ways of the question being asked, and let's see if I can stay on track with it. I think that given the basic fundamental of a technique is what your expectation should be of the instruction piece of it. As the student or the person that you're instructing continues to gain experience, then the system is never ending. It continues to evolve. And that becomes not only with your adding things to the curriculum when you feel like it's viable to do so, but even things that you don't even add to the curriculum that may be a part of it because it's one of the techniques. You can ask for any technique that you want, whether it be a Teinagi, Kotegaeshi, or whatever other technique that you want, but there could be thousands of different applications, entries, ways of approaching it that you can continuously add to the curriculum constantly. So I think that the system never ends. I don't know that you can ever give that instruction to any one individual. I think every individual that you're teaching is their own individual in itself, and they continue to become themselves in the way that they continue to evolve and learning from the basic fundamental, starting with the solid foundation of the explanation of the technique that you're trying to teach.
Okay, any other thoughts on this?
Yeah, George, it's Thomas. I think of it in terms of the way people will teach a foreign language. And we're giving them verbs and nouns, but we're not going to teach them every conversation that they're ever going to have. They're going to take those tools, put them together in ways I may never have seen, and come up with the defense that works for them. So it's the basics. I guess it would be the same as teaching chess. I'm not a particularly good chess player, but you learn the basic moves. But there are going to be chess players that come up with strategies that the instructor never thought of, and that's fine. It's got to work for them.
Okay, I mean, I'll have students and sometimes even black belts when they're testing, they'll say, which, if I ask this, and I want to see an Ippon Seonagi one arm hip throw, and they'll say, which one do you want me to do?
Yeah.
And my response is, which kind of takes them aback initially, do the one you can do the best. This is a test. If you've got a choice of answers, you want to choose the answer that works best for you. And that's a how do you say a unique concept in a different concept in testing, because in many cases an examiner is looking for a specific answer, which is why you have multiple guess questions or essay type questions. You're looking for specific information, and to say to the student, well, you've got all this information, put it, as Thomas is saying and Darren's saying, put it together in what works best for you. The same thing applies to some of the questions that I ask that are for black belts that they have to answer for me. And some of them will say, what is the correct answer? And I'll say, well, there really are no wrong answers. Because they're subjective questions, you choose the best answer and support it. And that's hard for people to do because they're kind of like, their concern is, am I going to do the right thing in the right way? And the other side of the coin, where we're saying, well, choose the one that works best for you, or whatever your position is, that's fine, be able to support it. They feel it kind of puts them out on a limb until they get the confidence where they can do this without feeling that they're out on a limb.
I'd say here's a little additive to what you're saying. I take that in a different approach when you're trying to observe someone perform a technique and you're requesting to have them demonstrate one specific technique. And I'll use the same technique that you're referring to in the Ippon Seonagi. There's one Ippon Seonagi. There's the fundamental, the basic, the actual Ippon Seonagi. Where I think that people get confused and an opposite when they're being observed and perform a technique is, okay, I'm gonna do an Ippon Seonagi based off of a scenario potentially, or I'm gonna demonstrate it just off of a basic entry of it, but I'm gonna include something else. I'm gonna do a combination to get to an Ippon Seonagi. Let's say I'm doing a Sankaijo or to enter it into an Ippon Seonagi throw from it, right? And then they're like, okay, is it is it Sankajo or is it Ippon Seoinage? Well, if you're asking for Ippon Seoinage and you're demonstrating an Ippon Seoinage, regardless of what you're doing in preface to it or post of it, then it's Ippon Seoinage. That's the subjective part. You're looking for Ippon Seoinage. That's the technique. It's not the other stuff. You're demonstrating the Ippon Seoinage technique. That's what you asked for. But people often get confused about, okay, is it Sankajo or is it, if I'm doing a hand throw, if I'm doing a Teonagi, if I'm doing a Kotegaeshi, and I'm adding a Tayatoshi into it, is it Tayatoshi or is it the Tenagi? Well, if you're asking to see Tayatoshi, then and you demonstrate it, then you've shown me Tayatoshi. And I think there's a confusion there with that. So what I like to say to people that ask those type of questions is, I want them to perform at a higher level. So I ask them prior to the questions that may come in is pay attention to what's asked of you. Learn, be prepared to understand what the question is asking you to do. If they're asking you to demonstrate a certain technique, that's what your focus is on, regardless of the way that you want to get to it or the way that you want to perform it or the way that how you enter it, or if there's a combination that's involved in it. Often we ask for finishing a technique and demonstrating a finish, or having a compliance hold, or demonstrating something that you maintain control with it. So that leads to other things outside of the technique that's asked to be done. But the primary issue is, did you actually do the technique? And I think that's a mental lapse where they're missing that piece of it to say, okay, you asked me for Ippon Seoinage, I'm going to demonstrate Ippon Seoinage, but it may come with something before it and it may have something after it.
Okay.
Basically, what you're saying there, Darren, in so many words, is this is an art form, and each and every art form has its own version of infinity. And so the combining of techniques to demonstrate a specific technique is very normal, or becomes very normal the more techniques you know. But infinity is a scary notion. It's standing on the edge of a cliff and looking over the edge, and you can't see the bottom or the top or the distance. Yeah.
So maybe what we're looking at here more with more advanced students is their level. I mean, if I'm a person testing for black belt, they're going to I ask for an Ippon Otoshi just to give Darren a tough time. Okay. What I'm not, I know they can do the Ippon Otoshi or Ippon Seoinage or Tomonagi or what. I know they can do it, because I won't test a person unless I'm pretty sure they can make it. And I think most of us are the same way. So the issue really maybe what we're really looking at is a self-confidence level of the person who is testing, to see if they are willing to, are they just going to do a straight Ippon Seoinage, like is shown in my basic book, or are they going to enhance it? And do they have the confidence to enhance it in a manner that they look like they know what they're doing? And maybe that's what we're really looking for, particularly when we're testing for upper ranks, is are they confident? Are they willing to take risks? All these are really subjective things we're looking at in testing. I think if we're just looking for to see, and yes, we will see if a person does some distraction techniques, they do Ippon Seoinage, but they throw a sweep into it, either Ashi or Koshi Harai, and they put the person down on the ground, and they go into one or two submissions. They're still showing the Ippon Seoinage. And to an extent, that's what we're looking for, and all the rest of the stuff. It isn't necessarily fluff, but it's fluff. It makes the technique look better, but that takes some self-confidence on their part to take the risk to show all this stuff that may not be required, but it shows that they can incorporate the basic technique into their self-defense system, as Darren has stated in so many words. Am I?
I'd say something that I felt was going to be useful for me to keep it all organized in my own mind was the quick cross-reference chart that I put together as a Sankyu. And then as I came up through the belt ranks, I realized it needed to go a little further. And so I put together this book for my students. And the truth is I put it together for me. And I realized it would be useful for my students. And early on in the book, I list out the techniques. And your Budoshin Jiu-Jitsu system from white belt through 10th degree black belt contains 200 techniques. So they can see right off the bat in early pages that the yellow belt's got 15 techniques they'll learn. Green belt has 24. Blue belt has 21, a total of 24. And on and on. So the point I'm making is that they're able to look and see the big picture. And at black belt level, the black belt guide I put together simply has all the techniques alphabetized according to the Japanese alphabet. So if I want to look up Ippon Seoinage, I or a student can look up Ippon Seoinage and see that your system has 4 points, has 4 forms. There are 2 Ippon Seoinages in your system, and there are 2 Ippon Itoshis. So they're all under the heading of Ippon. And so you can quickly go and look up, Jujis and Himi no Katas and so forth and so on, alphabetically. And to me, this has been a great way to review, to use mental imagery and so forth, so that I can stay somewhat fresh. Who knows all 200 techniques at the drop of a hat? It's like your densho. How are we going to know 861 techniques? And the answer is you're not. But you can stay fresher by having material that you can wrap your head around and have access to. So I especially enjoy reviewing in the black belt guide, because I'll go through and in classes I walk in and say, who wants to do have a class on ukiyotoshi? We'll do the 4 ukiyotoshi's that are in your system that day, regardless of belt level. They'll get a taste of all 4. Good, bad, right, or wrong. It works for me, and it seems to work for our classes. The books are sold to the students for the cost of paper, ink, and binding. So they're sold at cost, so they're dirt cheap and practical.
Okay. If I don't know if I have a copy of the black belt one that you did. If you have it, I can check. But if you have it in a I assume you have it in a PDF format.
Yes, sir. In fact, it's on our dojo website. You can go. You can go. Anybody can access it right now.
I'm just jotting myself.
There's a digital copy available.
Right.
That had to happen because when they stand in line at a movie theater, I want them to pull their phone out and be able to study jiu-jitsu while they're waiting for their movie.
Okay. Okay. There's no excuse not to study.
Exactly.
Very good. Okay, let's move on. Let's move on to the second one. In teaching an existing brew or art, do you limit your teachings to that art as it was taught to you exactly, or do you include other things you have learned? Or what did your sensei do? Did they change things around from, what the purity of, what it said on paper, so to speak?
Sensei, with due respect, haven't we already gone there in our conversation?
Yeah,
Because
I think so.
we talked about variations.
Okay.
Yeah, I think this one's
Essentially-
more about like at what point is it kind of like the old you say like this is my grandfather's axe. Unfortunately, the handle broke, so I replaced it. This is my grandfather's axe. Oh, but the head of it broke and I replaced it. This is my grandfather's axe. Like at what point that you replace the pieces of the axe is it stop being your grandfather's axe? It's kind of like that.
Good line.
So
That's a good line.
Okay.
But I think there's a good point to be made here, because there are styles that insist you do it exactly the way it was taught to my instructor, who did it exactly the way he was taught, and further back. Danzanru is very much like that. There's only one way to do a technique. That's it. Then they don't incorporate anything else. They don't look at anything else. You're good at Danzanru if you do the technique exactly the way somebody did 50 years ago.
And that's more, I'm
Thomas, I
sorry, go
agree.
ahead.
So,
Finish.
sorry, I agree, Thomas. In Japan, that's how we learn things in Iwama. You're only taught, at least on the Kihon level or the basic level. You have to do it exactly how it's done, where you step, how you move your body. But then later on, they have like what Darren was saying a while ago. As you move forward, they have the what we call the Henkawasa and the Oiwaza. Henkawasa basically is the variations. They still teach you. But the Oiwaza basically is the practical application. That is the time we're in. Before the person adapts the technique, but this time the technique adapts to the person. Basically, it's like an ever like what Darren was saying a while ago, unlimited techniques, because it depends on what type of body you have, whether you're small, tall, or huge, or whatever. So we have one technique, what we call the iriminage, with one hand being held. There's the low variation, the middle variation, and the high variation, just to show that if you are a smaller person against a bigger person, or same person, same height, or taller person against a smaller person. So from there, that's basically you do the Kihon. You do it exactly how they teach it. Then that later, then you can adapt to the system. You can do those variations later on, and they won't mind. But before you go to that particular level, you have to do exactly what you are being taught.
Yeah.
I think to take Thomas's comment and your comment, Ari's, and look at Budoshin Jujitsu, we do initially teach a technique to teach the technique. This is how it's done in an ideal situation. Your uke standing there like a pole, and they're working with you. And then we move, as the student gets better, we move into less static situations. Okay, how are you going to go into a Ipponsunagi for a hit, for a double hit, for a choke, and so the student, because with Budoshin Jiu-Jitsu, as with Seki, the emphasis was on self-defense rather than you must do the technique this exact same way, till hell freezes over, and beyond. We don't look for a person doing the technique exactly correct as it was done, maybe as it's done in Danzanru or some other martial arts that are very rigid. And this is how it is supposed to be done, and you should know this. There is value to knowing that.
Yeah.
Okay. Because you need.
By the way, I find it similar with karate. I don't know if I'm. Then correct me if I'm wrong. But when I do karate, when they teach karate, you have to do exactly the Kihon, even the stance, and then how
Right.
you move forward, how you kick, how you punch. But later on, when you're doing the kumite, you're basically allowed to do whatever you want.
Right.
Not exactly how you're being taught before.
I mean, I have seen some jujitsu systems where they practice kata constantly. That's all they do. And they have prearranged forms. This is how you respond to theoretical attacks. Okay. They're absolutely beautiful to watch, but they can't fight their way out of a wet paper bag. And that to me, beauty is nice to watch, but you have to be able to deal with reality too. And that's the hard part. I would think in most martial arts system, as you're saying, that once you get to a certain point, you're put in more realistic situations, and then you've got to modify this rigid way. Oh, this is how the Ippon Seoinage is supposed to be done in an ideal situation. Oops, but something went wrong.
Right.
Now what do I do? And that to me is it's a challenge in learning a martial art. It's, what happens when I'm attacked, maybe if someone's bear hugging or putting a bear hug around me from behind under my arms, and the person in front of me swings at me, maybe I can somehow do an Ippon Seoinage and throw both of them at the same time. Anyway, there is a difference, and that basic skill level is essential, but at some point you have to deal with the reality of the situation. I threw in a third topic because this came up. I was talking to someone this past week, and you've got your curriculum that you teach, okay? Do you teach anything else? I mean,
Is that a question for the group, or was that the question on that you were
yeah,
asking?
that's the question I asked. Do you teach anything other than what's in the handbook, or what's in your ruse curriculum? Dane, I mean, what do you normally teach? I mean, what martial art per se?
So you would call it karate, and then
Okay.
whatever I want. That's the way I learned,
Okay.
And I found there's two ways of doing that too. You say it's the style, and in this style we do this, and then you do whatever you want. Or you say the style does this, but here's something extra, is what I've found too. Even if you change it totally, you just say, this is what my master taught, and then you just do it.
Okay, let me rephrase the question.
Jiu-jitsu, then boxing fundamentals, sensei, for me.
Hey, that's good, Darren.
Let's okay. I teach jujitsu. I can also teach handbo, jute, short stick. I've only gotten hassle once teaching short stick from Tad Kubota. But we had a very nice conversation about it, and we left on neutral terms. Because he said, where are you getting the techniques from? And I said, there's a concept in jujitsu or Budoshin jujitsu that's known as empty hand. I said, they're all the techniques you're doing are empty hand techniques. All I've done is added a 6 or 7 inch length of wooden dowel to whatever hand technique I would do. He wasn't exactly happy with that, but he did ask me not to use the term Kubotan because it was a trademark name. So I said, okay. And that was our compromise. But, do you teach other things other than just your martial art. I mean, that's the question. Yes.
Sensei, for us, it's jujitsu, karate, and boxing.
Okay.
But like I mentioned early on, we're not opposed to bringing in Sistema from Russia, Israeli Krav Maga. We're not opposed at all to focusing an entire class on judo, aikido. So, you know, at what point? I mean, judo and aikido are like subsets of jujitsu, and eventually you get back to what I said earlier, and it's all jujitsu.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, Mark Tucker, who used to teach with me, he was very successful in integrating Krav Maga into jiu-jitsu. Initially, I wasn't too excited about that, but as I saw that he blended it well, you know, you can't really. Okay.
At a certain point, it's the scenarios, not the techniques.
Correct.
Like it's still a hip throw, just you're doing it from inside a car seat and the guy's got a ski mask or whatever. But
Correct.
it's still just a wrist lock and a hip throw. You know?
Right.
I think from what Darren said, Dane said, for example, in Aikido we have Tantodori, or the against knife, but the attack for the Aikido on the Tanto is quite basic. So what I do is I teach them how to do the attacks from the Arnis or the Eskrima, the Filipino martial arts. So with the slashing and everything.
Right.
So technically, we when I do teach them how to disarm the knife, it's not pure Aikido anymore, because it's more the way the attack is being done by somebody who knows Eskrima or Arnis.
Okay. I think what you're both saying here is that ultimately we train our students to deal with different scenarios, and that's, you know, we and I've used this term before, we try and get our students away from there's a concept in the US called deer in the headlights, and I think everybody understands what it means. Aries, are you familiar with the term
Oh yes, that's it.
deer in the
Very much.
headlights?
Yeah.
And that's a hard, you know, to me, that's a totally separate skill from any martial art you're learning. And that's what takes away the attacker's advantage, and also the fact that you respond to the attack so quickly rather than standing there for a second or two saying, oh my God, what's happening? That reverses the situation because the attacker is not expecting a response that he's getting.
George, are you the question? Maybe I'm misunderstanding the question. I never taught a class at the Y that was advertised as this is karate. I always taught jujitsu.
Okay.
But there were lots of things that I've picked up. All the times that you had Camp Budoshin, back when it was called Camp Budoshin, and you'd spend all day with all these different instructors, most of them from arts outside of jujitsu. And there wasn't a time that I was there that were more than once I go, wow, that's an interesting way of doing it. I never thought of it that way. And I might incorporate it into what I taught, but I only taught jujitsu. That's the only thing that was ever in the catalog at the YMCA.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I think what happens is Seki taught all this other stuff as an extension of jujitsu. He said, okay, once you know, quote unquote, jujitsu, which is kind of an all pretty much inclusive art anyway, you can do all these other things. It's just a matter of training your mind. Thomas, was I back there? The last time I was back there, I did a empty hand session when we used kitchen implements.
Yeah, yes.
And
MC's not thrilled about how they came back from that class.
Right. But the point is, they were still doing jujitsu, and so
Yep.
even though I may teach, I can do a seminar on handball and jute and short stick and uh, spatula, kata. Uh, it's still all based on jujitsu. And so I guess the correct question is, do you teach, if you're teaching something other than the, jujitsu moves themselves, are you saying to the students, this is something completely different, or this is how we use jujitsu to apply to a spatula or what do you put on a cake frosting spreader? They do have my wife has 2 or 3 lengths of those, and,
In her weapon bag.
the only thing you have to be careful with is a 2-pronged fork. Those can do a lot of damage, but
let me try to jump in here, Sensei. Happy New Year, everyone, first of all. Still early in the year. There's when we look at the whole picture, there's curriculum, and then there's training format, and then there's what you're trying to accomplish, right? So to me, these things are a means to an end. So how do you know if your curriculum is complete? Well, what are you trying to accomplish as a result of teaching that curriculum? Are you seeing that in the students? Maybe not every single one, but the majority of them. No, then maybe you need to modify your curriculum. Teach less, teach more, teach different, whatever it is. But the other part of that, the curriculum in itself is almost meaningless without the training format, right? Because you can have the best collection of things in your curriculum in the world, but if your training format is not in alignment with what you're trying to accomplish, then a lot of times I find that the adjustment that's needed is in the training format and less so in the curriculum. And you see this with, when the third question was, when do you change things, right? Well, the training format oftentimes, if you look back in history, reflects on the culture and the time, when it was done. So in a commercial school, your training format is going to be different than in a military setting. You could be learning the same techniques. It could even be the very same curriculum. But in the military environment, it's going to be very different. There's going to be a lot more resistance. You're going to be going at it a lot more. The conditions are going to be different. Where in a commercial location, you're not preparing them for war. You're not preparing them for combat. It becomes more of either a sport or self-improvement or self-defense. Then you have your different age groups. So as many of you know, we teach a wide variety of age groups. So I could be teaching the same curriculum to all age groups, but the training format could be very different between those age groups, depending on, I'm not going to teach, weapon stuff to, my 6-year-olds, for example. So, but the technique is the same. It could be a kotegashi or ipansai nagi, whatever it is. It could work against, a knife attack or something like that. But I'm not gonna train them that way because I don't want them going after somebody with a knife, if somebody breaks in their school or something like that. And so I think those two things have to be thought of as one unit. It's your curriculum and your training format. And then based on the results you're getting or not getting, you have to adjust one or both, or depending on, where the problem may be. And it may not always be obvious, so you have to sometimes play around with it. So as far as, teaching things, this is kind of a whole, sometimes it could be a can of worms, right? So I'll just speak for myself. I kind of got away from thinking about styles a long time ago. I just think of it as science and strategy and then goals. Because to me, the style is always how you execute those things, right? And sometimes, when I don't think it's teachers necessarily that don't want you to change things, but it's the organization itself. So certain organizations are much more fixed on this is exactly how you're going to do it. So you get tied into a style and you start copying that style. And maybe it works for you, maybe it doesn't work for you. And sometimes that's why those things die out, over time. So I think there's only so many ways you can kick, punch, maneuver, from a physical perspective, there's only so many things that can be done. And everything else to me is a concept. So whether it's judo, jujitsu, whatever you want to add to the Jew, is the concept of receiving. It's soft, so, whatever techniques you put under that category, as long as those techniques are being filtered through the concept of that softness, that gentleness, you could call jujitsu or you could call, judo. And then you have, go, which is hard, right? So sometimes, people say karate is a hard style. I say I disagree. I think some organizations practice it as a hard style, but if you go to Okinawa, it's anything but hard. In fact, you'll see more soft techniques in karate than you'll see in a lot of other things. So to me, these are all concepts. Karate is a concept, judo is a concept, jiu-jitsu is a concept, aikido is a concept, and somebody put a curriculum together to practice those concepts. But how you practice, what techniques, go into those concepts, I think should always be flexible. So from that perspective, your curriculum and training format and how you're doing things is a point in time, right? So at any point in time, you could say it's complete. But then a few months down the line, a couple of years down the line, it could be different because there's a whole new generation that's coming in that thinks different, that is maybe less coordinated, does less physical active things. So now it's no longer complete because you're not accomplishing your goal. So at any point in time, it can be complete, but as a whole, it will never be. You always have to adapt. And really, isn't that the whole thing of martial arts? I mean, isn't that what caused the development of new technologies and different strategies and things like that? Because as times changed and as the approach changed and as the people changed, the terrain and everything else, you had to adapt, to kind of improvise and overcome those types of situations. So why would we be any different, in the way we do things?
Oh. I'm looking for a particular book because it basically says the same thing. I can't think of the book now. It's if you go to my reading list on my website, it's the first book there, which has to do with it completely changed how I taught history and a lot of other subjects as a school teacher, but it applies to this as well. Is that basically it's saying is that inevitably, as Chris is saying, inevitably things change. And you can't, if a particular society is at one level of development, they will come up with the ideas and things that other societies may already have and are prohibiting them from having, or if you're learning one quote unquote one martial art, and you realize times have changed and thing, well, maybe I need to start looking at this issue, then that gets included into what you're teaching. Because arts evolve, they're not, or let's say the world evolves. The art can be there, but if it's going to be relative and workable, it has to be changeable to the extent to can't think of the word, changeable to the extent to adapt to the current situation. There's no sense in learning how to for self-defense. We don't learn how to defend ourselves against for the most part, a sword that was used during the Middle Ages, because nobody carries those around anymore.
Oddly enough, not a lot of people carried those around in those days either.
Right. Or were allowed to.
Yeah, exactly.
And we could go through the same issue on handguns today, but
Yeah,
it's
really just about adapting,
adapting and evolving. And I think if you're going to be a successful martial arts instructor, successful at anything, you have to be, you can have your standards, it's good to have them, but you have to be able to adapt and change to meet the changing society, because otherwise you'll get left in the dust.
Right.
And
if somebody comes in and says, I want to compete in MMA, my general curriculum and training format is not conducive to that, right?
right.
But what I can do is I can very quickly put together a curriculum and training format that would help them prepare for that, because that's a very specific, type of thing.
Correct.
However, I would not use that for the general masses, because that's not why they're there.
Right.
And you'd lose 80% of them at least, if you put them through that kind of training.
Right.
Same with everything else. So yes, somebody earlier said you can call it karate and teach whatever you want. That's what a lot of places do. That's true, because there's also the advertising concept, right? So I have equal ranking, like for example, in Hapkido. Not a lot of people know what Hapkido is. So I don't advertise under that banner. So karate is something everybody recognizes. Jiu-jitsu, most people, recognize. But you have to be clear on what you're teaching, right? One thing is name recognition, but what you're teaching, if you're honest, really should fit, within the concept of that. So I think under the jiu-jitsu, because Aikido came from Aiki jiu-jitsu, right? So it just, in the training format, it emphasizes more on the Aiki portion rather than the jiu-jitsu, portion. And so the training is a little different, but it's the same Aiki jiu-jitsu techniques, from hundreds, practice for hundreds of years.
Right.
So it's really, and that's why you see there's certain kind of crowds that are attracted to certain kind of quote unquote styles, because it's what that practice is promising and promoting, so if it's never about hurting somebody and always providing them a way out, then the Aiki concept might be more palatable for somebody with that type of mindset. If destroy them quickly, hit first, hit hard, no mercy. Maybe a Krav Maga or something, type of training might be better suited. But that doesn't guarantee that that's how that teacher is teaching under that banner, So ultimately, it doesn't matter what they're calling it. You really have to go see what's happening, to see if it's in alignment with what you want. And sometimes you may realize that what you wanted maybe wasn't the right thing. Maybe you should be looking at something different, Because what do people do? They'll do an internet search, they'll talk to somebody, oh, go study this if you want this, go study that if you want that. And so they'll search under that banner, and God knows what that teacher is really teaching, once they get there.
Amen.
Yeah.
Right.
But they guarantee you're going to have the best art in the world because that's what theirs is.
Of course.
The only true one.
Yeah, I always have trouble with like even world champions, right? I mean, I love football, American football, but we say world champions. It's like most of the world doesn't even play American football. How do you call it? Did you actually play or fight everybody in the world, when you say mine is the best? Like, come on,
It's either a
Chris,
small world or a small football.
Chris, that's just a shining example of American arrogance. That's all.
Right. The let's go to something similar because we're gonna. It says
Yeah. It just to stay there 1 second longer, it just occurred to me that I think a lot of this is that we're kind of looking at the question wrong, and it's my question, so you're welcome. I gave you the wrong one.
A good question.
I think that now that we're talking about all this and hearing everything, it's an issue of having the wrong perspective, kind of like there's a lot of focus on what instrument you're playing. And karate is an instrument, jujitsu is an instrument, each one of them is just an instrument, and each of them is playing music. Like none of us are jujitsu people, karate people. We're all musicians, so to speak. Like it's not that you play the violin or the piano, you're both doing music using a different instrument. And there's different mechanics involved. There's different techniques, but like not really. You need finger dexterity on the piano. You need it on the violin. You have to know where the notes are here. You have to know where the notes are here. And then whatever your chosen voice is, you're doing the same thing. And you can't do something different. Like the piano and the violin are doing the same thing. They're not doing different things. And, it's in the name. That's what makes it so funny. Budoshin, I'm not even thinking about it, is like the heart and mind of Budo. Like what we do is Budo. We don't do jujitsu. We don't do karate, not Tai Chi. Each of those is like a dialect of Budo. That's what you're really doing. Whatever Budo means, that's what it is, and it's just a different color on the spectrum or whatever, but you're still in the rainbow,
Yeah, it's a concept. That's why I say it's a philosophy, it's a concept, and in the curriculum, I don't even really like in ours, I don't even really list specific things. I have categories. So for example, groundwork, right? And depending on the class, or whatever the case is, there's different techniques that go in and out of that category. So for kids, maybe I teach them a couple of things. For adults, maybe I teach them more. But I don't want to be fixed on a certain type of techniques or a certain number of techniques because I may discover a different way to do it, in another year, or I may, learn something different, and then I'll bring it and put it in that category. But if I just kind of list different kinds of techniques, I mean, to me, the technique is just a delivery of the science. So how many techniques do you actually need to get somebody off of you, or get out of the way or something like that? You just want enough techniques to teach them, to give them a good understanding of the concept of leverage, push and pull, balance, muscle control, these types of things. And that number will be determined by who you're teaching and the crowd you're teaching and, how, their receptiveness and their ability to adapt to it. That's all.
How many techniques does it take a student to learn that there aren't any techniques?
Yeah,
It
basically.
took me like 100 scales to figure out that there's only one scale, which is every note. Like, every scale is just you're missing one of the notes. And then if you put that note in, it's just a different scale. So like at a certain point, there's no scales. It's just notes you play, same kind of thing here.
Right.
Yeah.
Anyone want to say anything else on this or? Okay, let's go on to the next one. Many some of the techniques I know that most of us have learned, we kind of categorize as ineffective. Or at some point when we're taught when we're taught the techniques of what value is this? What Seki would do, because one of his releases, if someone grabs your forearm from your side, is that you just reach forward and down, and then come back up in a circular manner, and they're still holding on. It's a beautiful Aikido technique. The person does a nice Mayukimi, and life is good. Okay, but the problem is that most people will. What do you say is most people will pull the arm. They're trying to pull the person's arm. So what he would do, he would get you out there without your uke, and he'd put a bunch of dollar bills down on the mat and say, pick up the dollar bill. Step forward, reach out, pick up the dollar bill. He says, now that's the way you do it to do the throw. You don't pull, you reach. And it's a concept, but if we just, unless you give the students an explanation, they think just picking up the dollar bill, they don't understand what the rationale to doing it. I've done it in recent years. Nowadays you have to use a $5 or $10 bill, but they won't pick up a dollar bill. It's below them. Bad pun. But there are times when there are what we assume just in and of themselves that are ineffective techniques or ineffective moves, but they're to teach a concept that we might not otherwise learn. And so Dane says, my father would teach me seemingly useless techniques and explain you never perform that technique in a self-defense situation. It's simply a demonstration of a principle. And sometimes we teach techniques, certain techniques or certain moves to have the student learn a principle or a concept. And that's hard to do because you don't know what's going on between their ears. Because you don't know whether they're reaching or pulling. It's something they have to realize in their mind. So your dad wasn't wrong, Dane.
Yep.
So are there, there are techniques that I teach or movements I teach that I would never use on the street, but they teach a concept. So I guess the question is, do you teach any movements or to your students that in and of themselves are useless, but they're taught so the student can develop a concept or understanding? Am I making any sense?
Yeah, and it's like the old analogy, a broken clock is correct twice a day, right? So any technique could work under the right circumstance. So from that perspective, there's no useless techniques. They may be less useful, but it'll be right twice a day under the right circumstance. And sometimes I think it depends on the group. So for the higher levels, certainly, black belts and higher, I think it's beneficial to teach those things because you're now driving home the concept, and they already have that foundation. Where at the lower levels, they may just take it as gospel and actually try to use it, So it's like any other exercise you go through. It makes you understand something, have a deeper insight into something you already may know. And I think this is where, going back to kind of how we do things right is when you join an MMA gym, you know exactly what you're going to get. You know, when you join a more, you know, regular karate, jiu-jitsu, judo, whatever, you don't really know because they're teaching a bigger market for very different reasons. Everybody's going in for different reasons. You know, where something like an MMA, I don't think you would see any concept related techniques there because it's all about the training format. In fact, there's not a whole lot of techniques. It's just like military. It's simple, you know, to the point. But I think there's value to it, you know, to answer the question. It just depends on the crowd and the level of people. If it helps, you know, accomplish what you want, then there's value in it. If it's not, then, you know, there isn't. But just because there isn't for you and your crowd, it doesn't mean somebody else may not be able to benefit from it.
What do you think about explaining that? Should that be something that you let the student kind of figure out over time, like whether or not this is useful and why it's useful, and then figure out like, oh, they were just teaching me a principle. That's cool. Or do you say it to them? You say, look, don't try to do this if somebody pulls a knife. It's just teaching you how to control your body weight or whatever.
Yeah, for me, I say it. Sometimes we do drills, like flow drills and things like that. And I'll tell them right up front, this is to better understand how to flow from one thing or the other. But don't try to defend yourself like this. It's just one part of it. Because how do you transition from one technique to the next? How do you transition, you know, footwork, handwork, you know, positioning and things like that? You're basically taking a snapshot of a bigger whole and you're elaborating on it, you know, for that because that that is something that's going to up their game if they understand it, or it's going to hold them back from upping their game if they don't in the long run. And I see this all the time, you know, when I travel with black belts. You know, they're become good technicians, but they have a hard time actually going at it, you know, because of that one component, you know, that I think is missing, you know, that needs to be emphasized. But I go ahead and put that up front because, you know, like Sensei Kirby said, you don't know what's going on between their ears and how they're perceiving and interpreting, you know, what you're doing.
One of the things I've learned over the years, and I have a bad habit of using stupid examples, because somehow people understand them real fast. For a front choke, I used to say, "Well, you step forward with your right foot, and you raise your right hand up in between their arms, and you turn to your left." Okay. And where did people mess up? They had difficulty raising their right arm. So I said, what did you do in your kindergarten or first grade, and you really were excited about answering a question and you raised your hand really fast? Just do the same thing, raise your hand really fast, and they get it. And they find that when they do that, they just raise their hand, somehow it breaks and turn their body, it breaks the grip. You know, and I think many times these are what I call duh concepts. You know, it's something sometimes if we change how we, as Chris said, if we change how we explain something, somehow it clicks in their mind. And you have them go through the physical, just raise your hand. You know, the whole class raised their hand. You know, that's what you do. And they get it. And it's a lot easier than giving a really long physiological explanation of what happens when you raise your arm and turn your body. Okay. And you can save that for later. Once they've done it, then you can explain it and they understand your explanation. So, and maybe going back further to what I think Chris or Dane may have said, it's not the curriculum necessarily, it's the explanation or how you change how you're teaching something. That's important. And like normal response, if someone's pulling, we have normal, if someone's pulling your hand or trying to get you to go with them, most people will resist. And I'll say, no. If they want to pull your hand, you go with them. And they look at me like I'm some sort of an idiot. And I said, for the upper belts, what did Seki say you do to your attacker? You always help your attacker. I said, now, if you go with them, I want you to just go with them. And then when you feel a lack of pull, that's when you turn your hand and and they try and low, it works. Okay. And sometimes you just have to run them through really simple stuff to get I don't know, it's a complex concept. Well, if they don't understand it, it's a complex concept. And once they do it, they say, duh, this is simple. Okay. Then you've won the battle, or they've won the battle. And that's why I say sometimes you just have to do what seems like really stupid stuff to get students to understand something that's really simple.
Sensei, on a specific and personal level, you and I had some email exchanges back when I was in Q grades, and I don't know that you'd remember these specifically, but the Mai Ushiro Nagi and the Hidari Te Nagi, both of these were concept techniques for me, and I figured they were they were what I called 10% techniques. And in our email exchange, you simply stated that both of these are nearly 100% key techniques, and the concept that these techniques teach is primarily key.
Right.
So the Mai Ushiro Nagi, the forward rear throw, and the Hidari Te Nagi, the left hand throw, both of those all of a sudden became more than 10% techniques in terms of their value for me learning personally, and also for me explaining that to students as I teach them, both of those. I remember especially, well, with both of them, it's like, I'm going to learn these, I'm going to get good at them the best I can for the testing, but I never saw myself actually using either one in the real world, or even sparring, in Randori. Yet the value there is the sense of key that is developed.
Okay. I think you hit a key word in there. The word was key. Key is probably one of the most difficult concepts to explain to students. And it takes them a while to understand the concept. And in a sense, it says, you got to use your key. The students say, key? Because it's not, it's a feeling. And once you realize how to use, once you learn how to use the person's, the direction of their mass, and combine it with the direction you want, yes, you are, is what Seki says, you are helping them. And, so key is a difficult concept for students to understand. One of the easiest ways I've found to get them to understand it is, we have a technique for front choke lapel guard where you come and you strike the larynx, okay, with the tip of your middle finger, okay, and you can either push it back and they go backwards, or you go behind their jugular notch here and push down, they go down, and it's amazing how many students, particularly kids, will stick their finger and push down just to see what happens. And they'll gag, which is the normal reflex. And they begin to understand how their movement works. But the actual technique, we have them say, well, you don't stop here. You have to go through the person's neck to the back of their head. But I don't want you to do it for real. I want you to go to their side and do it. and step forward and give a really loud ki at the same time. And if they do it really fast and ki, they begin to realize the concept of ki and energy flow. You know, they start to put things together, and that's what you want students to be able to do, to get the concept, to get the principle of the technique. Is, you know, they need to put themselves into that technique completely. And once they do, you know, and so for some students it's really easy, and some students it takes several acts of God to do that. What other example can I find for ki? No, other simple ones offhand.
You know, hearing you talk about ki is making me think it's kind of the like it's kind of the same thing as when like ki is the entire point of everything you're doing, and it's kind of what you get from it. Like ultimately you've got your ki is what's stopping the attacker and etc. It's that feeling you've got, like you're adjusting your ki to blah, all that stuff. It's kind of the thing that is getting better and better and better as you progress.
Yes.
And I'm thinking that, you know, for a musician, that's what you call their ear. And
Yes.
for a photographer or an artist, that's their eye. Like you have to develop a good eye. Like, how did you take
Yes.
such a pretty photo? I've got a good eye, you know, and I think ki, like what makes you a good martial artist? Well, I've got good ki. Like, I think that is just like it's what it means to be good at it, kind of, is that, you know, it's your eye or your ear.
Right. When another example I use is I'll ask the students, how many of you have played football? You know, a lot of them raise their hand, the American football. And, and I said, okay, if you're on the line and the quarterback says hike, what's the first thing you do? Anyone want to answer the question? What's the first thing you do as you move into the against the other side that's on the line? What's the first thing you do? You I think Thomas is waiting. You give a loud shout, a ki to get the air out of your lungs so that when you make contact, you don't get the air knocked out of you. Okay. And you say, okay, this is your ki. Doesn't matter what you call it. You can call it a scream. If you're really frustrated, you can go into a closet and give a loud primal yell, and you'll feel a lot better. And you can walk out of the closet with a big smile on your face as everyone else is worried about your sanity. But you're getting the energy out of your body. You're getting the energy to flow. And that's, you know, so it doesn't matter what it's called. Like you said, for the musician, it's the ear. For the photographer, it's the eye. Okay. For the gardener,
Green thumb.
it's what?
You get a green thumb.
Get a green thumb.
Wow.
I mean, you know, every I don't want to call it vocation or avocation, or every skill that we have, there's a way to develop the key for that. And but it's a hard thing to explain.
Sensei, if I may,
Go ahead.
to what Dane mentioned a while ago, we were taught that there are several levels. First one is like go no sen, which is you react after an attack. And sen no sen is like intercepting that attack, or you moving before that. And then sen no sen, which is the aiki. Technically is like what Dane was saying, that you already have the initiative before the other guy moves that initiative, before the attack. You already know that you can feel the ki. So that's the connection of the ki.
Right.
The problem with ineffective techniques are some of the teachers, especially in Aikido world, a lot of teachers, they teach immediately the second and the third one, the Sen no Sen and the Sensen no Sen, without even going to the Kihon or the basic, which is Katai Keiko or the hard techniques first. So that's why the students, they always they thought that this technique will work. But basically it won't work because they have no understanding of what those things are before. So they how can, for example, what Dane was saying, how can a musician, like how can he like go with the flow with the other musicians if he doesn't have that skills before? He never learned how to play the guitar or the piano. He was just taught how to do these things without really going to the basics. So in Aikido, the reason much of the Aikido world is maligned because they were being taught the kinonagare or the flowing techniques immediately. Flow, 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 without really going to the hard stuff before. So that's why I agree with Dane when he said that it's like you have the eye, you have the skills before things are, when you see it, you know already. Or when you feel it, you already know that it's there. But you gotta have that particular skill or that knowledge before you can get to that higher level.
Yeah. I think it comes, you've got to have the practice. And I know that with some jujitsu systems and some Aikido and also other arts, there's a tendency, some uke will just, they're trained to go with the flow. Doesn't matter what the Tori is doing, they will do, and they've learned to do that for their own protection. Okay. And that's well and good, because when you're learning, ideally that's what you want, because that way you can sense how the other, to an extent, how the other person feels as you're throwing them or doing whatever technique, yada, yada, yada. It doesn't matter. Okay. But you need the practice in, number one, learning the technique to know how it feels in the initial setup. You need to know how depending, if there are different attacks, how you respond to those attacks so that you can do whatever technique you end up doing, whatever it may be. And that's where the practice comes in, the critical practice comes in. Once you get a person on your hip, it's easy to throw them. Some people think you have to pull them over you. Seki said, well, you use your leg muscles, get them off the ground, and then you just simply turn your body to the left. And lo and behold, they will fall off your hip. You now have done a Koshinagi. They need to get the basics down, but they also need to, how do you deal with, okay, if he chokes me, how do I get into a Koshinagi? If he hits me, students need to work with all these different kinds of attacks, because then in a street situation, you're going to end up doing whatever technique you end up doing. You're not going to say, oh, he swung at me, therefore I will do a Ippon Seonagi and I'll finish with a wrist lock press. And then maybe I'll give him a knee to the ribs just to make sure he doesn't get up. You don't think of all these things because there's this concept we call mushin, where your body is, your body is moving faster than your mind can think, but your mind is still actually controlling all this action. And that's what takes the practice. Because
you don't actually know a technique until you can do it in the relaxed awareness of Zanshin and the no mind of Mushin.
Right. I mean, you need to be put into situations where, as we'll do with our students, they will continue, not just one attack, do this technique, another attack, do this technique. We ultimately will put them into situations usually by the time they're brown belt, where they're going to be continuously facing random attacks for a minute or two. Now, their uke will be cooperating with them, but the uke doesn't know how, the tori does not know how he's going to be attacked. The uke doesn't know how he's going to be thrown. Okay, those are the two big unknowns. And that to me is the critical part, because then the technique that they're using to throw the person or take them down or to hit back or whatever you want, whatever it is, that part is really irrelevant. It's the fact that they were able to respond effectively to the technique, which I think is what Chris and Dane and Thomas and even Darren everyone else has been alluding to, okay, is to respond effectively to the attack. And I'm speaking just with respect to jujitsu systems. There's some, like I said, there's some systems that can do beautiful kata. They can do beautiful routines that are prearranged. But you put them in a random attack situation and they're in deep trouble. And yes, the quality of the technique does suffer.
Yeah.
That's a given. On the street, the quality of the technique is going to suffer anyway. But the people watching will be tremendously impressed with you. And they ask you afterwards, what did you use? You say, hop chop foy or something. You use it. It was on the back of the cereal box. I don't know what and this brings up another really critical factor. And I've told this to my students in the classroom. If you're in an accident, vehicle accident, and the police get stuck with a lot of paperwork, they do. And if you're in an accident, they want to know right away what happened, yada yada, the whole 9 yards. And once it's down on paper, I said, and I'll tell them, and I'm saying this now, this is not legal advice. Once it's down on paper, it's very difficult to disprove. And so I will tell them, just say, and if you're in a street situation and have to defend yourself, and the police ask you, what did you do? You say, I don't know. Give me some time to calm down. I'll come back tomorrow. I'll come down to the police station tomorrow. I'll give you a statement. But right now, I don't know what happened. Unless you want to say it was motion. And then they're going to look at you like you're some sort of idiot. But anyway, yeah, but that's the reality. You need to have time to calm down and figure out what happened. And it may even be necessary to write it down on paper and rewrite it, but don't take that paper with you and don't show it to anyone else, because it can be used against you in a court of law. And that's a hard thing to say, but that's what I tell my students, that if they're in an auto accident or you have to defend yourself, I don't know exactly what, and it's what you're saying is probably a very legitimate statement, because you don't know what happened until you've calmed down and you can, I've had students that have been in street situations, they come to talk with me and they don't know exactly what they did. And we eventually talk it out and they eventually figure out what they did. But anyway, so
I said, Sensei, you want to be the first one to call law enforcement, because
Yes.
the second liar doesn't have a chance.
right. That's an important thing, Dave, that usually the first person that calls the police usually has more credibility, quote unquote.
In my experience, when the police show up or when the law enforcement shows up, the first question is, who called? Who called me?
Yes.
I did, sir.
I mean, it's sad, but that's the way it goes.
Yeah.
At least in the US, some parts of the US. Anyway, Okay, I think we covered topic number 5 in the process. There are made-up ineffective techniques that generally will not work and are just intended to look spectacular or impressive, not for effectiveness. Ah, it's different. Those are the Kimi no Kata technique routines. And you see them in every martial art.
If I may share a story, Sensei, from
Sure.
Japanese teacher. So we were doing we did an embu or demo, but before that we were practicing. He said, I don't know why, but the other school, when they finish their embu or their demo, everyone's clapping their hands. But when we do our embu, everyone's leaving. They're so scared of us,
They're so what?
scared of our techniques.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So basically, it was like the other guys, we know that their techniques, they're like, that won't work, but their people are just clapping. So we were doing stuff that supposedly will work, but people are not, they don't like seeing it. They're just going away.
Well, people want to be entertained. They don't like reality.
Yeah, that's very true in karate too.
Yeah.
There's an entire, even with like the authentic Okinawans, there's like 2 different karates. There's public karate and there's real
Oh, yeah.
karate. And
Yes.
even
Right.
most traditional, like you just get in there and do one clean technique and get out, no fancy stuff. When it's demo time, it's spinning jump kicks, kicking an apple off of a knife, and breaking bricks and doing a backflip and all that kind of stuff with like music going. But then like you get to the dojo and it is just, okay, go punch that 600 times, go stick your hands in ball bearings and rice. But for the demo,
So one of the techniques I will use when I've done demos, if I have an upper belt, and we're and he'll be standing in front of me, and I'll just take my index finger and go in a counterclockwise circle, and they'll take a fall, and the audience is looking at, what did he do?
yep.
Yeah, it on a more serious note, I will use when I do when I've done demos, I will use a real knife. Now, the real knife is the blade has been dulled down. It couldn't even cut through soft butter. Okay. We did a demo. We had mats on top of grass, and I was the attacker, and the other black belt did a Tainagi. The knife flew out of my hand, and it hit the mat, and I came down on top of the knife. And it put the knife through the mat. I mean, the audience was silent because they didn't know whether the knife got me or what happened. So I got up. I looked at the other black belt. I pulled the knife out of the mat, and I looked at him and asked, "Do you think it will live?" And sometimes, that's all you can do. But that was a valuable learning experience for me. Had that knife been pointed in the other direction, I might not be here today. I mean, that, it was a reality check for me. But you want to do things, as Ari says, that look effective, but when they are effective, people realize that, and it really does scare them sometimes, because they don't want to see. I say people don't want to see reality. It's just.
I actually read something recently from around like the turn of the not this century, the turn of the last century, like the late 1800s or whatever era. And it was these, I think they were Okinawans talking about doing martial arts. And you hear over and over and over again that these things were done in secrecy and like you trained at nighttime in a backyard and all of that. And when you just say that, your mind runs wild that it has to be secret because it's so deadly and you can't just teach the public and all of that stuff. But
Yes.
these guys were like, they went on to say, they were like, I had to learn under the cover of darkness and we did it in people's backyards. And then they go on to say, because people look at you like you're a weirdo, that you're interested in fighting each other.
Yes.
Not because like they all knew about it and it was an open thing and you knew who taught, but they didn't want to see it and they didn't want to know who was doing it. And they just thought you were like uncouth because they're trying to get away from all of that at that time. You know, they're trying to adopt Western customs and abandon this like samurai thing and all of that. So you were just a strange person to do it, not it was
Yeah.
banned and secret things. And I thought that was really interesting. Like you're saying, people don't want to see that reality. You know, they're like, ooh, why are you doing that? That makes me cringe.
Yeah.
And that's why it was hidden, which I never realized that.
Yeah. I mean, people, the Ostro samurai warriors would just take, field workers from a lower class and use them to train on jujitsu techniques. And if it maimed or killed the, what do you call it? What would be the term for it? Servant or what, that was life. He is a lower class anyway. Didn't matter. You can get more of him someplace else.
You're like looking for samurai.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a different value system today. I think the ninja got by with what they used to do back then because you didn't have the amount of lighting and the sensors that you have available today and all the other things that if someone tries to sneak into your house and you're quote unquote up with the technology, they'll never make it. We have some houses, I mean, our house isn't that well lit, but there's some houses that have in our neighborhood that, you get within 100 feet of the house, all these lights go on and lights up the neighborhood.
They have ninja traps in their basement.
Pardon?
They have ninja traps in their basement.
Ninjas,
like mouse traps.
we don't have basements out here. But anyway,
right.
that's a back east thing in Midwest.
That's good. Less ninjas for you that way.
Right. You just have people who take what do you call them? Not the mufflers, but the catalytic converters. They're really fast and efficient out here. Wish they could put it into something constructive. But no, it's society changes and the way you practice changes and it's hard to show techniques just to certain upper belts. It's how do you say I will try to teach techniques appropriate to what the student already knows and their maturity level. But sometimes it's just you can't avoid teaching techniques to people who are not necessarily qualified yet to use them, but you need that person as a uke, so they're going to learn the technique anyway. And sometimes they learn it fairly well, anyway, so I think we're going to stop at this point because the next one is Kodokan Judo versus Jiu-Jitsu. And it should be an interesting topic. And today's video will probably not come out until maybe Tuesday or Wednesday of next week. because Kimberly has decided we're going to Disneyland this afternoon into tomorrow. So it should be colder and windier down there than it is up here. And they're just, I say, if you've never been, we went to Disney World decades ago, and it was fairly enjoyable. It wasn't that crowded, but Disneyland is like it makes a sardine can look like the wilderness. They just let too many people in there. I guess it'd be like New Year's Eve in New York City.
It's also a much smaller park.
It's a much smaller
Yes.
that too.
Yeah.
Disney World, you can disappear for 3 days and your parents won't find you.
Oh, so that's why everyone goes.
That's right.
Lose
Get
your
away
kids
from
for 3
kids.
days.
Yes. But strangely enough, that's where I found the best book I've found on pressure points and massage was in the Japanese where was it? Where they had Epcot in the Japanese center. And I was able to get the hardbound edition of this particular book for some really $8-10. And I loaned it to someone and they disappeared off the face of the earth. And I was able to get a paperback, but it's a fantastic, it's been a fantastic resource. But anyway, next session, we're going to start with Kodokan Judo versus Jiu-Jitsu. And I don't know, it's not my most exciting topic, but someone may get. And then we're going to hit when the martial arts were secret. Okay. And how many of you teach secret techniques?
Aren't they all
It
secret?
wouldn't be a secret.
Exactly.
Everything's relative. Okay.
It's true.
One person's secret is another common knowledge someplace else. I got to find that
Very
book.
true.
Okay. Anyway, why don't you have a great weekend, and we'll see you on the 16th of January. Don't do anything too dangerous in the meantime. I think that's, unless somebody has anything else they want to bring up. I'm finally out of my cam boot for my broken toe, which was rebroken, and 8 weeks in that sucker was just way too long. And I went to the podiatrist finally. It's at HMO, and he says, "Why are you still wearing this?" I said, "Because all the other previous 5 doctors said wear it, but we don't. It's not the best thing to wear, but we don't know what else we can use." So life goes on. I'm back in shoes. Anyway, why don't you have a great weekend?
Thanks, everybody. I learned a lot.
Take care. Dave, I'm going to look that book up.
Happy New Year.
Can I put it on the website my website if I don't have it there yet?
Which one are you talking about?
The Black Belt Handbook?
Oh, yes, sir. I'll be glad to send you a copy. I think I sent you one years ago, but I'd be happy to send another one.
Yeah, no, I just want the PDF. I don't want the whole.
Oh, the PDF, that's at our dojo website, kataguide.yolasite.com.
Okay, Kai.
Kata, Kataguide .yolasite, YOLASITE.com. The little hamburger on the homepage will take you all over the place, and one of the places it'll take you is to the entire text of that book.
Okay, I shall try to look it up.
Thank you, sir.
Take care.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.
Hi, everyone.
Bye, everyone.